All right. I realize it's been a long day. Actually, it's been a long 2 days. And for some of you, it may have reached information overload a little bit earlier. But we have one last treat for you here with our final speaker. Before introducing him, let me remind you that we are going to be celebrating all year 20th anniversary of CERIAS, the 25th anniversary of COAST, and the next symposium that will be held will be April 3rd and 4th next year here. Mark your calendars now because we are going to have some surprises and some good times here for all of you to attend that. During the year, those of you who are here at Purdue certainly be involved with the things that we're doing. Those of you who aren't at Purdue, we have a number of ways that you can be involved with us. We have our online weekly seminar series that is broadcast on the web. We have about 15 years worth of talks currently archived online from many, many practitioners, experts, luminaries in the field, available for free. You can look at those. Our online library through our website has literally hundreds of papers, documents, theses, other material for you to use. A lot of it historical reference, all available. We have many, many other opportunities for you to take advantage of some of the resources we have and to participate in our activities. We'd like to encourage that. We certainly welcome that participation from any of you who would care to join us. To reiterate something that Jerry had talked about earlier, another way you can participate is next week is the Purdue Annual Day of Giving. Even a little bit is helpful. And so if you're interested in that at all, we have some of the forms up here, and you can probably talk Jerry into putting the T-shirt back on if you really want to do that. So tomorrow afternoon, for those of you who are going to be around and have not gotten enough of sitting in an audience listening to people talk, we have a symposium being held by the Purdue Policy Research Institute on security and democracy. And that will be held in Mann Hall tomorrow afternoon. There's information on that. Dow Hall. Dow Hall. It is in some building on campus. The Dowk Alumni Center, over sort of near the Union, just past Cranert. So if you're interested in that, Joel can give you more details. Noon to 5. I'll be speaking at it if you haven't had enough of me. But it should be an interesting afternoon with a number of speakers on a number of topics, and we would, I'm sure they'd welcome to have you there. Okay, so this is the last event. As I started off with the introduction yesterday, we have traditionally had 3 distinguished keynotes at these symposia. One from government, one from industry, and one as a distinguished practitioner in the field. I really can't think of somebody who more suitably fits that description than our speaker today. This is a gentleman who is widely recognized as one of the premier authorities on information security, risk management, standards, and pretty much anything having to do with protecting your systems. Ron Ross has been working in this field his entire career. He has worked in the Army. He has worked for the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. He is a fellow of NIST. He's a distinguished fellow of the ISSA. He was recognized a couple years ago by elevation into the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame. There's so much that I could say about him that would take up too much more of your time, other than to say he really is probably one of the most recognized experts in the field We are delighted to have him here to close out this session. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ron Ross.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me back there? Are we good? Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much, Baff, for that great introduction. You know, I said earlier, I went on Social Security this month. I turned 66, and when I get these introductions, it sounds more like a eulogy than anything else. So I'm getting a little worried about that. But thank you to CERIAS. Happy birthday to CERIAS. 20 years. I remember when Spaff first started this wonderful program a long time ago. I've known him about 25 years. I don't think he remembers how long ago we go back, but it was back when I worked at the National Security Agency back in the early 90s. Thank you all to everybody who showed up today. We have some active duty folks. Sir, thank you for your service to our active duty military. I always want to make sure we recognize those great folks who give so much of their lives to defending the country and allowing us to have all the freedom that we enjoy. Thank you to all the students and the faculty here for being part of a world-class program that Spaff has built over his lifetime. I can't tell you, I love going to these kind of events, especially when there are students involved and people who really do get it. And actually, my wife is from Indiana. Small town called Knightstown. Anybody know Knightstown, Indiana? We got a few out there. So she's also a graduate of Indiana University. I'm not sure I can say that here, but I had to get up early this morning and sneak out of the house I didn't tell her where I was going because I don't think she would let me go. Oh, good to see you guys, yeah. So I'll tell her that it was equal opportunity. But it's a real honor for me to be here today. Again, talking to the people who are the future is, to me, you can't spend better time, quality time, with the folks that are really going to carry the ball from here on. We're moving off the stage pretty soon. And the reason why I haven't retired yet is because we still have a lot of work to do, as you all can see. We've had a pretty rough couple of years in the federal government. The private sector has had an equally rough time. And the thing that I think we're going to have to go back, we talked about it a little bit on the panel earlier, but I think we're going to have to kind of change our fundamental direction. We've been living this party for a long time with all the new technologies and just the wonderful innovation that brings the smartphones and the tablets and everything you could possibly imagine. And at some point, we have to really take stock and say, can we protect all of the wonderful things that we're building? And I think that's good. You know, when I took my first computer science course back a long time ago, I won't even tell you how many years ago, Spaff mentioned a couple of courses like automata theory, complexity theory. I never, ever thought that I would use those courses ever. And I'm sure many of you who are in the computer science department are thinking the same thing. But in reality, I found out a couple of years ago that we're building an incredibly complex infrastructure out there. In fact, it's so complicated, we talk about an operating system with 60 million lines of code, and then you have all the applications and middleware and the firmware and the integrated circuits, and all of that complexity is out there now. And it's really fueling our productivity and all the good things that we take from that. But there's a price to pay if we don't get serious about protecting the infrastructure that we've deployed. Because these computers, the title of my talk was Pushing Computers to the Edge. And that means literally to the edge. In smartphones, in tablets, in power plants, in medical devices with wireless access, pacemakers. How about that? You want to make sure you know who your friends are when you have a wireless access to your pacemaker. This is the world we're building. It won't be too long where you'll get a new car. It'll be parked in your garage. I was telling my son this the other day. The car will wake itself up, communicate with the dealer. They'll run remote diagnostics on the car. The car will open the garage door on its own, drive itself to the dealer, get serviced, drive back home, close the garage door, and send you an email with the bill. That's the world we're built. We're not that far away from that now. It sounds like, Star Wars, 30 years. We have that capability very close. The question is, in autonomous vehicles and all these things that are, without human intervention, can you trust the computer and the software and the firmware to do what it's supposed to do? That's the bottom line. That's the question. And this applies to everything. Any place where you can push a computer that's driven by software and firmware, the same fundamental questions are going to be asked. So it really doesn't make a difference where you are in this space. There's a small group of people that are going to have the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities to really help solve this problem long term. And many of them are sitting right here in the audience today. They've been educated. And by the way, there's a big difference between education and training. And you know that when you come to this institution, and there's a lot of other great institutions around the country, but this is one of the best, you will know the difference between education and training. There's a lot of computer science departments today, as we talked about last hour, that are under a lot of pressure to bring in new courses that are more relevant, I use that with quotes, to getting a job after you graduate. But you know, pushing automata theory out of the curriculum and programming language design, not just being able to program in C or C++ or whatever the new language is, but understanding what makes certain programming languages better for building more trusted software. Certain languages have innate capabilities. Strong typing is one of those characteristics of a language like Ada. That was a language that the DoD got behind, I think it was 25 or 30 years ago. That was going to solve all of our problems in building weapon systems, to have highly assured software. Well, it didn't quite work out like we thought. And so these are the fundamental questions that you're going to be wrestling with, and some of these are technical, some of these are societal, and that's why this problem is so fascinating and not easy to solve. So let me take you quickly through a couple of examples here. We've had a really bad couple of years in the federal government. This was the first breach that I was a victim of in 2015. How many folks remember the OPM breach? This was a database that was attacked by one of our adversaries. This database was one of the most sensitive databases that we keep in the federal government. It has all what we call background investigation information. I have a top secret clearance, and so every so often they go out and they reinvestigate, talk to your neighbors. My file probably goes back to when I was 20 years old, 21 years old. And everything about your family, all that they interview your neighbors, and you take polygraphs sometimes, and all of that is sitting in this one file. And the adversary found a way to get in. They kind of got the low-hanging fruit first. They weren't using two-factor authentication. They got in with a compromised password credential, privilege escalation, and then march across a series of systems till they found the target of opportunity. And of course, then they just send letters out and say, hey, you've been compromised, good luck. You know, that's probably all you get. That was the first one. The second one was Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. I was a victim of that one too, because I'm a federal employee and my healthcare records sit in that database. So the only good news I got in 2015 was I wasn't part of this breach. My wife was very happy about that. I was very happy about that. But let me tell you what the average person doesn't see. Why is the adversary going after these three databases? Well, you have to connect the dots. The adversary wants to get a target list of all those federal employees who have top secret clearances, who have embarrassing health care issues, and are cheating on their spouses. And what does that give you? That gives you a list of targets for espionage. The only time you'll ever know that's going to come to have a bad ending is I could be sitting in a Bob Evans or Panera Bread, wherever your favorite coffee shop is, and someone come up to me and say, hey, Ron, we heard something pretty embarrassing about you. It came from my SF-86 file, and we can make that go away if you'll do this or this or this for us. That's how espionage works. And if there's 10,000 people on that target list, the law of averages say they're going to be able to turn a certain percentage of those people who are not going to want to have that information exposed. You see, that is the danger of what we're seeing today. Now, once that database is compromised, that information is gone forever. I call that an intergenerational breach. My children's information is in there, every one of my relatives. In fact, when you talk about 22.5 million records being compromised, that's just the primary people that were in the database. I had probably 20 or 30 people that were in there with me as part of my record. That brings that number up into the hundreds of millions. And the cost of this cleanup, this is another point. We never have enough money to do the right thing from the start, but we always find the money to clean it up. This breach probably is going to cost the federal government $500 million with a B dollars to clean up before it's all said and done. Credit protection for 22 million people and all their family members for a generation. As if credit protection really is what we have to worry about, because that information is going to be used by one of the adversaries not to sell. Our adversaries use this information for different purposes. Some will sell it on the dark web, economic gain. Every Social Security number, every record is worth some value. Other adversaries are going to use it for other purposes, maybe espionage. So this is a very, very serious problem, and it's totally preventable. That's the sad part about this story. Here's the key thing that we have to face today, and as scientists and engineers, I said earlier, we know how to solve this problem. The question is, will we have the will to do the right thing and get this ship kind of turned on the right course again? We love technology. I use the term addiction, and you can see that, you can see society, how it's evolved. Just go out to a restaurant, get on the metro or a train or an airplane. What's everybody doing? They got their head down and the two fingers. In fact, if we come back 200 years from now, maybe all these fingers will be gone. All that's left will be the two thumbs, because those are the things that are working the hardest all the time, right? But we love the technology. We love the technology. It's compelling, even for us who are in the business. I went to a movie with my wife about a year ago, and we're sitting in the theater before the movie starts, and the announcer comes on, and he says, you can download an app for your smartphone right now that will tell you the optimal time to go to the restroom in the movie you're about to see. You're laughing back there. You know the one I'm talking about. It's called Run Pee. That's just the name of that's the name of the app. Now we just got issued a brand new Samsung smartphone. It's a government issue. The policy says you can only put mission essential apps on that phone. So the first thing I ask, okay, that's a policy decision, but how is that backed up? Are you going to rely on me to make those decisions? Well, it turns out that if you're 25 years old, that app is not that important, but for someone that's 66, that application becomes pretty darn important. So mission essential is in the eye of the beholder. The problem is you have to have technology backing up the policy. It's just like when malicious code comes through your front door. We're going to talk about that today. You know, we have decades of empirical evidence now on cyber attacks. We get all the threat intelligence and all the after-action reports. We get classified threat data. We know who's attacking us. We know how they're attacking us, and we know the damage they're doing. And you know, we understand what's going on. The question is, you will never be able to have perfect security. Risk management is about doing everything you can to stop the bad guys, penetration resistance first, but then once they get in, this is very critical, limit the damage they can do once they're inside, and ultimately make the system as resilient as it can be. Those are the three properties now that we have to try to achieve. We've had this pipe dream for 20 years now or more that we could stop them at the front door. That's why all this technology, all the things we've been deploying have worked to some degree, but we're still getting hit every day, and they're coming up the winner all the time. The adversary, the offense, is always going to have the advantage because we're defending 360 around the perimeter. And so that's what's happening. The technology is moving forward at rapid speed, and we are sitting there holding on, trying to protect what we are deploying, and that's really where the problem comes to our current situation. Now, I use this. This is an illustration of complexity. This is the Internet of Things. I think they're the most recent estimate. I could be wrong now. 8 billion devices in the Internet of Things. This could be everything from a pacemaker to your smartphone to a router around your house. It's wherever computers are going, to the edge. And we're increasing the number of those IoT devices is increasing. I think it's almost exponential. It's probably not exponential in reality, but it's increasing at a very rapid rate. That's complexity. That's what it looks like. And so when we talk about why we're having these problems today, I think part of the problem is that security still stands in a stovepipe in many organizations. We talk about it differently, we deal with it differently, and we still think in kinetic space. Now, I'm from Washington, D.C. and Baltimore in that region, and I have a lot of friends who are in New York. This is 9/11. When you see a kinetic attack, you internalize it. You know, that day is etched in most of our memories. And the same attack happened at the Pentagon, right close to where I live. I had people who were in the Pentagon, lost their lives. So these kind of things don't ever leave you. They're part of your internal psyche. And kinetic space is one way to look at the problem, but we also have this notion of cyberspace. Now, I want you to start looking at the cybersecurity problems. We tend to look at this from one perspective, but I want you to start looking at cyber from two perspectives. Let's use the waterline. You know, there's above the waterline things that we are going to talk about, and there's below the waterline. And if you want to think of it in an example in the ocean, everything bad that happens with sharks and glaciers happens below the waterline, right? So we tend to think of things in cyber above the waterline. Now, the folks who are here today who are part of this program and are taking either bachelor's or advanced degrees in computer science engineering, you guys understand what below the waterline means. That's the hardware, the firmware, the software, the systems. These are cancer cells. And I use these to show an example of what happens below the surface. If you have cancer in the early stages, you're walking around feeling fine. And then the cancer cells will double. And that's how they measure the aggressiveness of the cancer, how often they double. It's an exponential problem. And at some point, those cancer cells will start to attack the organs, and then you'll be gone. We tend to think of the world in kinetic space, not in cyberspace. Now, how does this affect the problem that you're facing today with complexity? The greatest threat that we face today is not on the NSA's or the CIA's top 20 list. The greatest threat we face today is complexity, period. If we can't manage and reduce complexity in the systems we're building, we are not going to be able to protect those systems or even make them as resilient and survivable as they need to be. This is a computer science and engineering problem. And when you start to study complexity theory, if you haven't done that already, or automata theory, you realize there are certain things that outstrip our ability to understand. That's why the number of lines of code that you can prove with formal methods has a finite number, and it's not that big. It's not 60 million. I can tell you that. I characterize this as the N+1 vulnerabilities problem. A lot of you are going to deal with organizations. They're going to come to you and say, above the waterline now, I have 100 vulnerabilities, and I'm going to work to reduce those vulnerabilities, hopefully to zero. I'm going to try to apply security controls. I'm going to deploy functionality, good security, make the system penetration resistant. But this problem is not going away because you can fix every one of your vulnerabilities today, and I'm going to bring you one more tomorrow. And the day after that, I'm going to bring you 10 more. And the day after that, I'm going to bring you 100 more. Exponential growth. Now, why is that? Because complexity equals growing attack surface. That's a term we use in computer security. Attack surface is giving the adversary more space to do damage. Now, you can't have an unlimited growth of your IT systems and not manage that complexity and not deal with the attack surface. You're basically giving the adversary carte blanche to do whatever they want, whenever they want. Now, if you want to, there's a terrific report, 2 of them you can download today. If you Google Defense Science Board, Military, 2013, Resiliency, you will bring up a PDF file of a Defense Science Board report that was done in 2013 for the Department of Defense. The DoD basically asked the Defense Science Board, could the United States military withstand a massive cyber attack and still defend the country? You see, we push computers so far to the edge. They're in all of our weapon systems. They're in the power plants. They're everywhere we care about. Critical infrastructure and things that are highly, highly sensitive with regard to national security and economic security. And the results came back in that report. Now, what made my hair stand up on edge was they talked about vulnerabilities. And they talked about classes of vulnerabilities. And I'm going to kind of summarize here. There's 3 basic classes of vulnerabilities. The ones that you deal with every day, the known vulnerabilities, above the waterline. The big companies announce the vulnerabilities, the patches, and you run around and try to fix stuff as quickly as they announce the patch. Those are the knowns. Then one level down are something called the unknown vulnerabilities. Those are, you may have heard the term 0-day. That's where the adversary knows something about your system or your network that you don't know, but you will very shortly after they launch the attack. The threat exploits the vulnerability to cause mission or business impact. And there's a certain likelihood associated with that. And that's the unknowns, the 0 days. The third layer below that, there's a layer of vulnerabilities that are created by the adversary. They come into your network or system. They establish a presence. You might have heard this is called the advanced persistent threat. They want to get in. They want to unpack their suitcase, make themselves at home, and basically they live in your network, creating new vulnerabilities that they will come back and at a point of time of their choosing. not of your choosing. So 2/3 of those classes of vulnerabilities are totally off your radar. Even the best scanning tools. Do you realize that the average time, the adversary was in the OPM system for 7 months before we discovered they were there? And of course, what do? We send in our crack forensics team. It's like going into the barn. The doors are blown off the barn door. The horses are all gone. And we're looking around and say, what happened here? Well, we know what happened. That's 2 years. Adversaries are in these systems up to that level of time. Now, you know how fast you can exfiltrate data today. 2 years is a lifetime. 6 months is a lifetime. 7 months. They don't need more than a day or two to get in and get out. And the high-end adversaries can actually cover their tracks. Sometimes there's no forensics that you can run to tell what happened. That's the reason why what you do is so critical today. Because the only way we can solve this problem is to re-architect our systems, re-engineer our systems, to build a security architecture that's fundamentally part of that overall enterprise architecture. And that's going to take every component. This is why I talked earlier about the panel. This problem is not just a government problem, not industry, not academia. We have to work together because most of what we use today in the commercial products coming from industry, the operating systems, the routers, all the applications, the middleware, all of that stuff we have to raise our game and build more trustworthy, secure products. That's the reason why the document I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes is so critical. That's the System Security Engineering Guideline. And I was listening to some of the presentations earlier. They really have the same theme. Hey, everything is getting more complex. We're pushing stuff to the edge. We have a lot of things we rely on. We're pushing these things into critical systems. Boy, we got a big problem, and nobody really knows what to do. I would argue that we do know what to do, and hopefully when you leave here today, you'll have some things you can go back and reference, because I guarantee you the 800-160 is going to bring, it has brought forward 40 years worth of trusted systems, concepts, and technologies that go back to when SPAF first started in this business, and I did a long, long time ago. We just haven't been successful in getting the right people to listen. And now we're to the point where we've built this wonderful infrastructure that is highly vulnerable, and we're going to pay a price at some point. Now, some people talk about cyber Pearl Harbors. I said, we've already had our cyber Pearl Harbor 100 times over. If you don't think the OPM database or emptying out the national security, how about the Snowden thing? They emptied out the entire National Security Agency, terabytes of top secret SCI data. Or how about the recent CIA, all the tools that were released? You see, guess who has access to all these tools now that are going to be turned around on every one of you and your organizations? You see, that's what happens when we don't pay attention. And so we can, this is kind of intoxicating. We're loving the technology, but at some point, it's going to come back. It already has come back to bite us big time. So how can we get better at this stuff? Well, I already mentioned these three things, but if you're building a system today, when you look at 800-160, we talk about a system. We don't even use the term information system. That's been kind of a misnomer. Information system gives you the impression this is a workstation or some kind of a mainframe or some kind of a large computing, general purpose computing system. Really, system today has taken on a new meaning. There's a massive convergence of cyber physical systems. These computers control the air conditioning in this building. They're being pushed into power plants, industrial control systems, medical devices. So we've taken the word information system and changed it to system. And systems can consist of a set of system elements. That's what you're going to read in the first two chapters of 800-160. Even if you're not a security engineer or a systems engineer, read the first two chapters of 800-160 because it'll give you an idea how we can solve this problem by dividing and conquering. Every system is made up of a set of system elements. Those can be operating systems, routers, people, processes, software. They're all individual elements that each one of those elements has an associated degree of trustworthiness that you can attach to that element. And you bring all these elements together with that system boundary, and that gives you some capability. And some people say, they throw their hands up, and I know SPAF and I have had this discussion a lot. 20 years ago when we kind of lost our dream of having trusted operating systems, common criteria and all that, people said, you know, we can do high assurance, but we can't do enough of it. You know, it's too expensive, it takes too long, and the world's become too complicated now. So we basically said, okay, we give up. But you don't have to have high assurance and trustworthiness everywhere. We have a definition for trustworthiness, which comes from Peter Neumann in one of his reports at SRI maybe a couple of decades ago. Trustworthiness means being able to trust a system to do what it's supposed to do. And that ties back to the functions and the requirements that you're placing on that system. And we have a kind of a little funny saying we use. It's called the trusted garage door opener. I want a trusted garage door opener. It doesn't do a lot of things. It does one thing. It opens my garage door and closes it. But it does it with high assurance. Now, I use that as an example because we have this pipe dream because we think of our systems as general purpose operating systems and all the applications they have to support. That's the world we've built, supporting as many apps as we can on this general purpose operating system. And that's hard to do high assurance because of the complexity. But what if we go back to the notion of like a thin client? What if we pare this system down to only the functionality that we need to do the job? That could be only the functions needed to fire that smart weapon, open my garage door, or run a power plant. Forget about having a general purpose operating system that can do all of that because all of that is not necessary. Now, this is where it gets hard because we've kind of grown accustomed to using those general purpose operating systems and loading them up with as much stuff as we possibly can. And then people wonder why we can't trust them. It's a physics problem. I say physics, it's a computer science engineering problem. And unless we can solve that problem, we're never going to be able to get our hands around this whole overall effort. So when we talk about a system and protection, this is all about risk management. You can't have high assurance everywhere, but we know how to have high assurance where we need it. And I can mobilize about 100 people right now, to include this gentleman sitting right here, that can tell you how to do that and where to do it and how to be successful. That's what Spaff's built his career on. So harden the target first. Penetration resistance. That's doing everything we know how to do. That's encryption, two-factor authentication, strong access control mechanisms. You know the whole drill with all those functions and the functionality. But we know about 10%, maybe 5% if you're lucky, of these attacks will always get through even after you do all this. You harden the target to the best of your ability, and they still get through. High-end nation-state adversaries. These folks play for keeps. They have smart people. They know the architecture. They know they just understand the terrain they're in a military context. The next thing we have to be able to do once they get in is limit the damage. So what does that mean? Limiting damage can happen in two very different ways. One happens in time and one happens in space. So when you think about what does an attacker need, they need to get through your defenses, and they need to have time on target. That means they have to have time to understand where they are, what it looks like inside, and how to move to the target of opportunity. That takes time. Now, if we can limit the time on target, that's one way to make their attack less effective. So if we can use virtualization, there's a lot of research going on now, maybe some of it here at CERIAS, that talks about using virtual machine technology, virtualization, to churn the infrastructure faster than the adversary can take advantage of the situation. And that means virtualization, micro-virtualization. That is not quite here yet, but that's one way to do it. You just don't give them any time to do their bad deeds. The next thing we have to be able to do is limit, that's time. The next thing, limit their ability to move laterally. In the OPM breach, they moved across several systems routinely by privilege escalation. Shouldn't it be the case that we make it very difficult to move from one domain to another domain and get to that treasure trove they want to get to? When you don't do network segmentation, domain segmentation, separation of your assets into the stuff that you really care about, when everything is kind of a flat file, if you will, then once they get in, they can rip through the entire system and steal whatever they want. So we have to do a better job of architecture and engineering at the very fundamental levels. And this is not just going to be a system-level problem that we deal with as consumers. This is going to be an industry problem as well, because we have to buy their operating systems and all the things that we have to bring together for that capability. So being able to engineer more trustworthy system components is going to be a key part of any future strategy that we have to use. So limit the damage. Ultimately, we want to make sure that the system is survivable. That's where resilience comes in, resiliency. Now, we've got a lot of security controls in our 800-53 catalog. In fact, MITRE did a really good study. If you want to Google this one, MITRE Resiliency NIST Special Pub 800-53, it will give you all the controls in our current publication that deal with system resiliency. There are a lot of creative things you can do, even given the commercial technology that we have to work with today, that you can do at the operational level to make that system more survivable. In the Army, I retired in 1993 from the Army after 20 years. We didn't have GPS when I was in the Army. I know it's hard to believe, but we had a map and a compass. So when I talk to my Army buddies who have GPS, they say, hey, what happens if the GPS goes down? What do you guys do now? They look around and say, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you, the Navy, recently at the Naval Academy, it's right down the street from me, they started teaching their sailors celestial navigation again. Now, why do you think they're doing that? Because they know the GPS is vulnerable. Now, you think about the infrastructure we're building. It's one thing to be worried about your smartphone going down or your tablet, but when you've got the warfighters and the intelligence community and the Department of Homeland Security and all of our Fortune 500 companies with all their intellectual property just built under the umbrella of this very vulnerable technology, that should make every one of us pause and say, what can we do to make this situation better? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to use this whole notion of 800-160. It's a framework, by the way. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But the whole issue is to redesign from the ground up. And some of this is going to cause industry to retool some things. That may be something we're going to have to put up with. How fast, how much, how far they go, that's the dialogue we're going to have as a society. Customers, government, industry, the academic community. This is the farm system, by the way. If you're a sports fan, every great football team has a farm system or baseball team. And that means those players who are playing today aren't going to be around forever. It's like Spaff and I are going to be off the stage. I don't know how long we're going to go, but we'll be off the stage in the not too distant future. So where are all the folks going to come who are going to carry this ball forward? They're coming right here. These are the folks that we have to rely on. So that's really the message today is, if you want to achieve trustworthy, secure, trustworthy systems that are resilient, there are no shortcuts to this problem. Above the waterline, that's where we spend most of our time. Look at what goes on in the security industry. We're building these scanning tools. We're being better vulnerability hunters. At RSA this year, I wasn't out there, but I heard the security industry says, hey, we kind of misled you for the past couple of decades. We really can't protect all this stuff, so we're going to become the absolute best vulnerability hunters we can be. We're going to go out there and we're going to go out and get every one of those vulnerabilities and we're going to attack them and close them down. And I'm saying you can be the best at that. You can do continuous monitoring forever. You can run every fancy tool you want to run. But if you don't manage your house below the waterline, it's like having a very fancy house with expensive curtains and marble and granite tabletops and counters and a foundation underneath that's being eaten by termites and is crumbling. You see, all the continuous monitoring in the world doesn't do you any good. I can check that broken lock on my front door once a day, or I can check it 100 times a day, and that lock's still broken. You got to get below the waterline, and that's where I think your future is going to be. Now, in cybersecurity, our NIST framework, the National Initiative for Cyber Education, we have a whole workforce framework. There are literally hundreds of different skills and things that you can do in the cyber workforce. There is a job for everybody out there. We're going to be 1 million or so jobs short going forward in the next decade or so. There's a place for everybody. But I'm arguing there's a special place for people who are coming out of the computer science and engineering programs, because those are the folks who will be designing and building the software and the systems. You guys will be building the foundation. And if you don't do those jobs correctly, nothing else matters. And that's a pretty sobering thing to have to say, but that's really what it's all about. In 800-160, we looked at a lot of NASA. I'm a huge fan of NASA because I go back to the 60s, and I used to fly model rockets, and I followed the NASA program from the early days when they had the first manned spacecraft back, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and the shuttle. And if you think about it, I asked myself, how come NASA is so good at this, building complex systems, putting men on the moon, and we can't protect our systems, we're squat? What's going on here? So I went back and looked at the whole notion of safety and how they build complex systems. You know, it's no secret that to design a space shuttle, it takes a lot of design engineering, a lot of redundancy and backups, but they start with a very solid foundation of engineering, and safety is an emergent property of a system that you have to work to achieve. That's the same thing with security. We have this kind of mythical thought that you can bring security in any time in the life cycle and everything's going to be okay. This happens in big military DoD programs where I was almost a program manager. I went to the PM school at Fort Belvoir before I retired, and then I retired. So I didn't get to actually assume a program management role. But in the course on program management, you would hear story after story of these great program managers. A lot of them are colonels, and they get to the end of the program, and somebody throws a bunch of security requirements on them, or security controls. And they say, oh, Colonel, you got to make sure this gets done before that program goes live. And they look around and say, well, how do I do that? This program, this system has already been through the entire life cycle. It's been through these requirements engineering part. It's been through the architecture and the implementation, verification, validation. We're getting ready to go live. Well, the answer is, you can't fix that. And what's the result of that? My friends in the DoD now are going through a massive relook at every weapon system to look at all the vulnerabilities that are in those systems because we didn't pay attention and put security as part of that life cycle process. That's the price you pay looking back instead of looking forward. So this is an emergent property that doesn't happen because you wave your hands and say it's a good thing. Risk assessment, the classic risk assessment is threat, vulnerability, impact, likelihood. If you're anywhere close to the security business, you'll know that by heart. We started looking at things differently in 160 in our new engineering publication. You can do a risk assessment from 3 different perspectives. You can start with your threat, and gosh knows we're building a whole industry of threat intelligence now. We have more threat data than we'll ever be able to use. I always say if I never have another piece of threat intelligence, I can build a trusted system. I don't need to know any more than I know now. Then you can focus on vulnerabilities. Some people start there. Say, give me all my vulnerabilities, and I'll focus on that first. And then some people go to the assets, the impact, protecting the... So this is the approach we took in 800-160. And I mentioned earlier on the panel, if you go back to the 60s, we built the nuclear triad. When they did a risk assessment back in 1960, they were looking at the Soviet Union. Now, they saw the threat. They know that we were vulnerable. And they could look at the consequences of the impact of not having a second strike capability. That was part of mutually assured destruction. That was our strategy. Still is today. We could absorb a first strike from the Soviet Union back in those days and still have enough nuclear throw weight to do a second strike and destroy the Soviet Union. That kept us safe for decades. That assumes rational actors, which doesn't always happen nowadays. But we made an incredibly expensive investment. The likelihood we were ever going to use those nukes, it was less than low. It was very, 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 very low. But we still made the investment. Why? Because the consequences of not protecting the asset, which is our country, our freedom, the United States of America, would have been catastrophic. So we made the investment, realizing we would never use it. So likelihood does not come into the equation at that point. Because if it were likelihood, that were the determining factor, whether you select a control or don't select a control in the classic risk assessment, we would have never built a nuclear triad. So you're going to notice in 800-160, we have a little gray box that says, don't pay attention to is it likely to happen? Can the adversary, what's the likelihood of the adversary launching that type of attack? we say, what can they do? It's not the likelihood, it's what can they do. Because sometimes the asset is so critical that you're going to go ahead and deploy your protection scheme, even if it's less than very small likelihood of occurrence. That's an important thing to know. Not for everything that we do in the IT space or the system space, but it's important to know for power plants, nuclear launch vehicles, weapon systems, things that we actually care about that could bring down our society. You know how close we are? Those of you remember Hurricane Sandy on the East Coast? That is typical. We had Hurricane Katrina and then Hurricane Sandy. And you notice after a couple of days without power, what happens? Long gas lines start to form. And then you see fist fights at the gas stations. You're seeing the tip of what I call societal breakdown. We are on the edge all the time. We don't realize. We take everything for granted. The lights are on here today. We take all this for granted. If there's an attack on a power plant, we think, okay, they fried that generator. Let me go down the street and bring a replacement in. You realize there are not a lot of replacements for these generators? And if there's a massive cyber attack on one of our power plants in Chicago, for example, that brings down, it could be a small power plant. I visited a power plant in Becker, Minnesota, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, that they provide power for Chicago. You realize if that power plant goes down, there's not a lot of backup generators they can just roll in. And so that's the danger of not paying attention, and not paying attention to whether it's cyber physical systems or industrial control systems. It's all the same problem. And that's why we're focusing on assets today and saying if it's important enough to be critical to the national or economic security, then you should go ahead and start to bolster that system and build trustworthiness into that system from the start. Or if you can't do it from the start to re-engineer so we can gradually get to a better place, which may take us some time. So the operative word here is engineer up. Look at the asset and bring up the engineering skills and all the capability that we know how to do to the level of the criticality or sensitivity of the asset. And that's going to be different for every circumstance out there. This is the document that we worked on for 4 years, published in November of 2016. I highly recommend after you download, I mentioned the one resiliency publication, the Defense Science Board 2013. You can also Google Defense Science Board Military February of 2017. It was just released a month and a half ago. Another report very similar to the original DSB report. It again reinforces how dangerous of an infrastructure we have constructed and some of the things that we have to start paying attention to. But this is the focus of the last 4 years. We worked with the old National Security Agency. They had their old system security engineering concepts and guidelines. They were part of the old NSA Information Assurance Technical Framework. I see my friend Mark Lepker back there. He's nodding his head. He remembers that. A lot of great stuff at NSA. I don't know why this happens. They do great stuff and then it disappears all of a sudden. Now, it doesn't disappear for any, surreptitious reasons. It just goes away. In this case, Chapter 3 of the old IATF was about system engineering, security engineering. I said, what happened to that? And I committed 4 years ago to going back and pulling that thing out of the archives and working with my friend Janet Oren, who has since retired from NSA, and said, we're going to bring this back as a NIST special pub. And that's what we did with this document. Now, we took it one step further. We said, we've been talking to ourselves in the security business for the last 30 years. It's like a small club. We all love each other. We all think we're doing great stuff, and then we turn around and nothing seems to happen in a big way. I said, why don't we take a new strategy here? Let's go and find the best system and software engineering publication we can that's an international standard. And we found one. It was a joint ISO IEEE standard. The number is 15288. I think I'll try to go to my next slide here so I can show you. That's the number we found. It's a system and software engineering standard. There are not a lot of joint standards around, but this is one where IEEE agree with ISO. So that means it's got kind of a dual endorsement. It's also been endorsed by NCOSE, which is the engineering consortium of system engineers. And we decided, let's start with the people who build systems for a living. And instead of making it all about us and kind of pushing our stuff up all the time, let's go to their house and have a discussion with the engineers and say, how would you like if we bring all of our 40 years worth of principles and concepts and trust technology, trusted systems development, let's bring that to the engineering world. And we took every one of the 30 processes. There are 30 individual processes here, 14 technical, 16 non-technical. I'll show you a real quick run through of those. And we integrated security and activity tasks into every one of those processes. Think of this as more of a framework. You don't have to do every process. You don't have to do every activity, but it gives you a task. But it gives you a structure in a framework context for how to make sure that you can build security into the life cycle from day one. And if we can't do that, then all this other stuff that you're talking about here is never really going to make a difference. I'm going to just roll this slide out very quickly because we're getting a little short on time. But again, these slides will be made available if you want a copy. I'm sure that SPAF can make them available. And these are the 14 non-technical. Classic life cycle. Now notice the first couple. These are critical. Mission, business analysis, and stakeholder needs and requirements. Here's where our big failure starts. We don't bring the security people in early enough in this development cycle. That's why those poor program managers are asking this question at the end of the life cycle. How do I make sure I can protect that system I just spent $10 billion on building? And now it's highly vulnerable. Mission business analysis says, we're going to have, what is the capability you want to achieve? What's your next mission or business application? What are the stakeholder needs first? And what are the stakeholder requirements? And only after we decide what those are, then we ask, how are we going to protect what the stakeholders need? And that's where we get this thing called stakeholder security requirements. Those come out of the stakeholder protection needs. Those get pushed into the system requirements, and then a subset of those become system security requirements. Those get pushed into the architectural design phases. There's some system analysis that goes on, and we're part of what we call the trade space churn at that point. What does that mean? Well, people who build systems want everything. There's tons of requirements in a weapons system that start out with the warfighters, and then they say, well, we got to go through cost, schedule, and performance considerations, and then they start to do trade space analysis. They trade off certain things. I want it to do this, but it's going to cost too much. I can't have the anti-gravity machine, so that's not going to work. I come back, we integrate security requirements into the trade space discussion, which means some of the security stuff is going to drop off the turn-up truck. You're not going to get everything that security folks may want, but the important thing is it's transparent. It's part of a process. We have actual senior leaders who are the stakeholders who are going to be using the weapon systems or using the system at TSA or putting that power plant into operation. They are part of that discussion. And what you're bringing to the table is a full and transparent acknowledgement of what the adversary can do when they are totally dependent on this great technology that we're all using. That's powerful. And so we're going to have to eat a little humble pie because we're not going to get everything. It's not all about us and security. We're part of an integrated project team that includes privacy, all the stakeholders, all the requirements. Folks, everybody there. It's like NASA when they launch a spacecraft. Used to watch the NASA team before the launch. They go around that big round table, and every one of those sub-mission owners has to give a thumbs up before that launch can take place. And when there's a problem, when they get a thumbs down, what do? They stop the launch sequence. They fix the problem, and then they come back and they continue the launch sequence. See, that's the power of using all of this life cycle that engineers have been using for a long time. We just haven't brought the two worlds together and forced them together. Verification and validation, two very different things. Verification, did I build it correctly? That's important to know. That gets to some of the fundamentals in software assurance, hardware assurance, correctness, all those things that tell you that the product is actually correctly built and can withstand an attack from a determined adversary. Not from a teenager in the basement, but from a determined adversary. Tamper-proof, always invoked, small enough to be the subject of analysis. Anybody know what that is? That's the reference monitor. That's the three properties. And if you think those things are outdated, then we're never going to be able to have a discussion about what it means to have trustworthy systems. Because if you can't make sure it's tamper-proof, always invoked, the security features, and small enough to be analyzable, then we're never going to get to that level of trustworthiness we need. Validation is something very different. That means, is it fit for purpose? I can have a trusted garage door opener that works, it's built totally correct, but doesn't open the garage door. Or I can design a weapon system that's perfectly correct in its design and all that, but it doesn't put steel on target. That's validation. Is it fit for purpose from the actual stakeholder perspective? All of these things are critical to making sure we can get across the goal line. I call limping across the goal line. Stop them if you can, limit the damage they can do, make the system survivable. And that's the mission that is in front of all of us today that we have to step up and address. Here's just a quick run through. I'm not going to spend any time. These are non-technical processes. But you can see in this document, we literally built all the activities and tasks out for every one of these non-technical processes as well. So you see things there like portfolio management, risk management, configuration management. These are all the things that surround a technical build process that every organization, whether you're public sector, private sector, industry, all the folks who are building stuff out there, you're going to find these things in every organization. Maybe not every one of them, maybe different degrees, but that classic life cycle, I would challenge anybody, whether you're using agile development or whether you're using waterfall or traditional means. A lot of folks say, well, this stuff's not going to work with agile. I was listening last hour talking about agile development. Believe me, even people who do agile have to go through that life cycle process. You can't do agile and forget about requirements. You can't do agile and forget about architecture or design. You do it maybe more rapidly. Maybe it's do a little, test a little, throw a little out to the customer, come back, and maybe that's more. But I'll tell you, there's no way that I found you can get around a classic life cycle approach on that slide I just showed you previously. So that's pretty much the 160. I'm not going to spend any time on this. We have a couple of very important appendices in this document that I wanted just to highlight in my closing slide here. After the roles and responsibilities, design principles for security and engineering and security fundamentals. This is the treasure trove that we went back and we worked with the Naval Postgraduate School, Cynthia Irvine, a good friend of Spaff and myself, many, many years out, NPS. They brought back all of the 40 years worth of security design principles that you need to actually do the things we're talking about today. It's all right there in one appendix. And we then integrated those engineering and security fundamentals, which show how to apply those in security policy and technology aspects that you'll need to know in actually bringing that material into the 160 framework. So it's all there. The challenge for all of us today is, are we going to get the senior leadership in the government, the private sector, and the academic community to care enough as much as all of you do? That's the bottom line. If you don't build it in, we've been saying this for years. Build it in, don't bolt it on. Those are slogans. Slogans don't protect you from determined adversaries. And we've been very lucky so far. I think General Tuhill mentioned earlier that the next attack on the critical infrastructure may not be so forgiving. And that's what we all worry about every day. Ultimate objective is to build security in so it's not noticeable. If we do this right, in 10, 20 years from now, we look back, there won't be any CISOs or security office. Everything about security will be so tightly integrated into everything we do, you won't even notice it. It'll be part of enterprise architecture. It'll be part of the SDLC, life cycle. It'll be part of procurement, acquisition. It'll be part of the engineering world. Disappear. It's like quality management in the 70s when the United States automobile industry discovered the quality of the cars wasn't up to what they thought, and the Japanese were building wonderful cars, the Six Sigma quality cars. What was our first response? We established a quality office. We put up a sign that says, okay, now we have quality. We have a quality office and a sign that says quality. Well, that doesn't really cut it. You've got to do Six Sigma type quality stuff. It's not just putting up a sign saying we have good security. It's an emergent property of the system. And that's why institutionalizing and operationalizing across the entire life cycle, up to and including what customers and users do on their end of the bargain. This is what we call the essential partnership today. That's why I mentioned the space race, President Kennedy. We cannot do this without you. You're making a huge investment. Some of the students out there, your parents are making large investments in your education. Couldn't be a better investment looking back on what what I went through in school for where you're going to be in the future. So you are the future of what we have to do. But we have to have the government step up. That's the part we're working on now. We have to have them to establish the vision and the leadership that we had back during the space race, because that may be the only way we can engage industry in a meaningful way and start some competition in industry to build better cars with airbags built in. I mentioned airbags earlier because they don't ask you to build your own airbag, do they? It comes with the car. Put your own seatbelt in. No, it comes with the car. Put in your own steel reinforced doors. No, it comes with the car. We have to be able to have that discussion with industry because they build us all this wonderful technology. But at some point, we have to ask all of ourselves, what kind of a future are we leaving to our children and our grandchildren with all this great technology? How secure will it be? How about your privacy? You know, you can have a wonderful world of technology, and if you don't have it secured and your personal privacy protected, then really is it worth it? And that's where I think we're headed here. I close. This is our engineering project at NIST. We're very small. We have probably 2 or 3 people now. That's how small. We don't scale like at NSA. NSA is very lucky. They have a lot of people. We have very few. But I use this picture of NASCAR. NASA and NASCAR are my 2 role models. Why? Because NASCAR produces great technology in a very high-threat, high-risk environment. And my model for that was when Dale Earnhardt, a little over a decade ago, I think it was back maybe over a decade now, 13 years ago, was killed at Daytona. For those of you who don't know what NASCAR is, these are high-performance race cars that run around tracks at 200 miles an hour that far from a concrete barrier. Turns out Dale Earnhardt, one of the icons of the sport, hit the concrete barrier at 200 miles an hour, broke his neck, and it killed him. Now, NASCAR didn't say, okay, that's the threat, so let's just slow the drivers down to 30 miles an hour. No, they were going to operate in that high-threat environment. They were going to find a technological solution. They built something called a Hans device, head and neck safety device. They use it not too far from here, Indianapolis 500, the raceway down there. NASCAR runs the Brickyard 400 every year, July I think it is. Every driver since that day wears the Hans device. No driver has ever lost their life because of that device is now routine equipment. You see, that's what science and engineering can do. High threat environment, high risk, the driver walks away. Horrific crashes, but they walk away. You see, that's limiting the damage. The wreck still occurred. The system still got hacked, but did they walk away with 22 million records in OPM, or did they get 500? That's the world we're trying to build. And again, I want to thank you all. This is our contact information. I am one of the few people who put my cell phone up there. My cell phone operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you're a student, faculty, industry, if you have a problem related to any one of our standards and guidelines, whether it's our controls, the risk management framework, the cybersecurity framework, the engineering guideline, you can call me anytime, and I will make time for you because I appreciate what you do very much. And I especially appreciate everybody who stayed this late in the day. If this were in D.C. at 4:30, this room would be empty because everybody goes to the Beltway traffic. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. And have a great conference.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. Ron, thank you very much for joining us. Very enjoyable. Twitter blew up with some of your comments. Appreciate you visiting and hope we can convince you to come back again sometime. Thank you to all of our participants who came and sat through the last couple of days. We do have our dates announced for next year, April 3rd and 4th. Mark your calendars now. If you registered for this event, you will receive an email in the next few days that will have a survey. This event is driven on the feedback that we receive from those who attend. So let us know what you liked, Let us know what we can improve upon. And you have our commitment that we'll continue to try to make this every year a better event for our attendees. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. And again, tomorrow, if you are around campus, the Democracy and Security Symposium is going on from noon to 5, and you get to hear Spaz speak again. Good evening.